What's going on?
I need that walk up there, but I can't reach it. Do you think you could grab it for me?
Sure.
Thanks!
No problem.
Hey, I'm John, and this is How to Be Human. Human life has value. If we don't agree on this, then you're probably going to want to stop watching this video now, because none of the rest of it's going to make much sense to you. And furthermore...
Why are you the way that you are?
Now, where was I? Right. If human life has value, why is it so hard for us to acknowledge it in one another? This isn't an easy question to answer. I mean, there's a host of reasons why. Sometimes we don't relate to each other. Sometimes we don't want to see the humanity in one another. And sometimes it feels redundant to acknowledge that somebody has value when they also have privilege. And that's what I want to talk about today. Privilege. From people denying that they have it to others calling it out in them, privilege is a hotly contested issue. It's defined as a right or immunity granted as a peculiar benefit or advantage or favor. But before we get started, I gotta get something out of the way. For some of you, you're anxious or tense, and I need to say something. Having privilege isn't inherently wrong. Most people who have it didn't do anything to earn it in the first place, and it's all about what you do with it. For instance, let's take a look at that example from earlier with the tall person and the shorter person, but we'll change a few things.
What's going on?
I need that walk up there, but I can't reach it. Do you think you could grab it for me?
Nah, you're good.
Let's say Adam's height is akin to privilege. It's something that he was genetically born with. What did you do to get so tall anyway? Exactly. In the first video, he uses his privilege to help his friend out, and we all thought, "Aw, how sweet." But in that second video, he ignores the plight of his friend completely, and we all kind of thought, what a jerk. You see, privilege can go one of two ways. It's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book, so there's no need to fret. In this video, we're going to take a look at some other misconceptions about privilege. There's a general consensus that it exists, but by the time we get done here, we should be able to have a conversation about it that's civil. So, let's get started. The first misconception. People who have privilege always feel like they do. This is actually very seldom the case. Most people who have privilege wouldn't say that they have it. I think it's because we're always comparing our set of circumstances to those of others. We're hardwired to want more, and we notice when other people do. And that's why a kid who goes to a private school where his parents pay $20,000 for his education will feel underprivileged when for his 16th birthday he gets a Honda Civic and his friend Claire gets a BMW.
Don't care how, I want it now.
Some of you might scoff at this, but there's a good chance that you fall into the same category. The point is, we're terrible at recognizing our own privilege. Misconception number 2. Privilege always impacts those who have it equally, regardless of their circumstances. On some level, you know this isn't true. The weight of privilege is situational. For instance, remember my tall friend? Well, he might not feel super privileged when he's playing basketball. He is, after all, only 6'3", and basketball players can be much taller. But when he leaves the court and goes home to his very average-sized family, his privilege is more apparent. Keep that in mind as you look for different areas where you might have privilege. Alright, misconception number 3, and this is a big one. Having privilege means that your life is without conflict. This is a ludicrous notion. Your identity is comprised of so many parts, and privilege can't override everything. For instance, as a cisgendered heterosexual male, I benefit from a great deal of gender privilege. But there are obviously some parts of my identity that mean that my life isn't without conflict. I get to be party to a lot of unfair and rude stereotypes. Actually, let's camp out on this for a second. I want to go back to my roots in story analysis. Can anybody tell me what makes for a good story? It's a tricky question, but I would argue that the most important element of a story is the conflict. And you know what? All of us have a personal narrative that we're weaving, and we all want to believe that the story of our life is a good one. Sometimes when we call out privilege in others, it can feel like we're robbing their story of conflict. Comparison sneaks in, and all of a sudden, the privileged party's identity is at stake. Let me tell you something. Your story matters. It's unique, and no one can take that away from you. So let's move forward from this place with confidence and our identities intact. After all, human life has value, right? So why is it so important to acknowledge our privilege in the first place? Well, I think that depends on the goal. It's my belief that we ought to be working towards unity and understanding, and living in such a way that we benefit mankind as a whole. And that comparison thing that I talked about earlier, it works both ways. We shouldn't just compare our lives to those who have access to more than we do. We should compare our lives to those who have access to less opportunities than we do. We aren't actually owed privilege. And if that's the case, why not spread the wealth? You see, observing areas of your life where you've unintentionally gained advantages and working to make sure that other people get those same opportunities, that sounds a lot like working towards the good of mankind. And if you want your life to have meaning, and you want others to know that you have a good story, I can't think of any better way to do that than by acknowledging that other people's lives have meaning too. Speaking of working towards the common good, have you ever noticed that Nobel Prize laureates never win by being selfish? They generally win because they advance humanity as a whole. But why do we care about people advancing humanity? Darwinian logic would suggest that those smarty pants should just keep all their information to themselves and let the rest of us idiots die off so that the human race would grow stronger. But we like it. We like that they share it so much that we give them a cool prize and $1 million. And I don't think that's because we just want to survive. I think it's because we acknowledge that each part of humanity, roughly all 8 billion of us, have value and we're worth saving. But John, what does all this have to do with privilege? I'm glad you asked. By now, we've talked about how privilege is circumstantial and how it doesn't mean that your life is without conflict. But right about now, you're probably realizing something else. How many, if not most of us, have it. At least here in America. But without a doubt, some privilege feels more substantive than others. For instance, a man born into extreme affluence. But to him, he might not even feel like he has privilege. I've got an example. If I say, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, what comes to mind? Oh, this guy? That's right. Fred Rogers was born into extreme affluence. He rode to school every day in a limousine. Yeah, that kind of money. But I'd be willing to bet that his privilege didn't feel super privilegey to him. You see, he grew up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which was a small industrial town. And because of his family's wealth, he was ostracized by his peers. He didn't make friends until he was almost in high school, when he became friends with a jock who leveraged his popularity to help Fred make new friends. What most people don't know is that Fred grew up watching his mom knit sweaters for World War II veterans and volunteer at the local hospital. And there's little doubt that that woman choosing to use her privilege to benefit others, and the football player who helped him make friends, are the reason we got Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I'm not certain, but I think if we asked Mr. Rogers if he'd lived a privileged life, he'd say yes. But what made him great was what he did with it. He paired his lived experiences of being bullied and watching his mother serve others with his privilege. And he made the world a better place. He never won a Nobel Peace Prize, but he inspired so many kids and their parents. And there's no doubt that that guy believed that all human life had value. So in closing, a person's privilege is never the most important thing about them. The way we conduct ourselves, how we choose to live, the core beliefs that we hold, those will always say more about us than the random set of circumstances that we happen to be born into. Privilege is a neutral concept. How you choose to see it says something about you, but what you choose to do with yours says more. So, how will you benefit the world? Will you acknowledge your privilege, or will you let pride get in the way of you living the life that Mr. Rogers would have you to live? Not me. I'm gonna follow in his footsteps, because that guy knew how to be human. All right, you made it. That was the longest episode of How to Be Human I've ever made. It was a hard one to write, but I had a good time with it. I want to give a special thanks to my friend Wendy and my friend Crosby, who helped me write that one, who consulted on it. But privilege is a complicated topic. It gets a lot of heat in the media, and I just kind of wanted to do what I could do to cool it off a little bit. So tell me what you think in the comments below. Be sure to like, hit the notification bell, subscribe. You're doing okay. You're getting some views. It's nice. Feels good to be seen. Feels good to be heard. More on that in a future episode. Thanks. I will see you in the next video. Bye.